Yep, go right ahead, Amir.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good morning, and thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the Stationary Source Committee meeting. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with the public participation. We ask that everyone be patient as we navigate this together. We have two formats to participate in the meeting: the Zoom web application and teleconference. Both formats, Zoom and teleconference, can be heard in English and Spanish. If you're calling into the meeting and wish to listen to the meeting in Spanish, please call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID number 999-9613-8871. Again, for the Spanish teleconference line, please call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID number 988-9613-8871. For those participating in the meeting via Zoom, it is critical for everyone to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen that looks like a globe. Then select the language of your choice, either English or Spanish. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. These are very important, so I ask that you pay close attention. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell phone or desk phone. This will ensure that we are not hearing any feedback or causing interpretation during the meeting. Interruption, sorry, not interpretation. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for board members and South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means that you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raised hand button. This will signal to the host, excuse me, that you would like to provide public comment and you will be added to the list. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise button on the bottom of your screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note, you can hang up and or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please adhere to speaker time limit. Please treat others with courtesy and civility, and respect the public meeting process. Rules prohibiting the use of signs or posters remains in effect for video participation. Profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures are prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting is also prohibited. Any violation of the above rules can result in your mic being mute, your video feed shut off, or you being dropped off from the phone or Zoom meeting lines. Thank you, and with that, Mr. Chair, the meeting is yours.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And if we can go ahead and get a roll call, please.
Sure. Senator Delgado. Board Member Krakoff.
Yes.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Here.
Supervisor Perez.
Here.
Supervisor Rutherford. Councilmember Benoit.
Here. Very good. Thank you all for joining us a bit early today. We have a packed meeting as usual for Stationary Source. I see we have quite a few attendees that have joined us as well. Thank you for joining. I'd also like to thank staff for working on getting the translation for Spanish set up, and I'm really proud to see that working today and hope it works well. With that, since we have quite a few people that are looking to speak, I'm sure on multiple items, I'm going to go ahead and reduce our speaking time so we can get through the meeting today. Again, we got 6 items, so what I'm going to do is go to 1.5 minutes each, with a total of 3 minutes for all the 6 items. So if you need to speak to multiple items, don't use up your full 1.5 minutes on that first one. Just want to let you know now. So we have a total of 3 minutes if you want to speak to a second or third item. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll first go to the annual progress report for AB 617. Jake Ogosh, go right ahead. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Chair Benoit and members of the committee. My name is Jo K. Gosh, and I'm the Director of Community Air Programs. I'll be presenting on the AB 617 annual progress reports for the 3 community emission reduction plans. Next slide. So just a brief timeline. In September of 2018, 3 communities within our district were designated for the AB 617 program, and specifically for the development of community emission reduction plans, or CERPs, as well as community air monitoring plans, or CAMPs. These 3 communities are listed there on the slide. In September of 2019, just last year, our board adopted each of these 3 CERPs and implementation began. And then earlier this month, the CAR board actually approved all 3 CERPs in their board hearing. I would note that this board hearing was delayed for several months due to COVID. Next slide. The annual progress reports are required by the AB 617 statute, and specific elements are outlined in the CARB Community Protection Blueprint. I would note that this, even though it's called an annual report, this first annual report actually only covers a 9-month period, whereas the subsequent annual report will actually be a 1-year period. We did provide draft reports to each of our community steering committees for comment and review in August.
Okay, your audio is coming in really choppy. You might want to turn off your video, and that might improve your bandwidth.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Actually, there's one more thing I can do. I can drop my VPN. So.
Oh yeah, don't use VPN.
Sounding any better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, can I try to turn my video back on? Maybe. I'll give it a try, and you can tell me if it's bad. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. So the report includes several elements as outlined in the CARB blueprint. This includes any updates to the community profile, an overview of our CERP framework, as well as the specific actions, goals, and strategies. We outline the metrics for tracking progress and provide also a qualitative assessment of the progress that has been made. And of course, if there have been any key plan adjustments, because we know that we had to build in some flexibility to these plans, those are also listed in the annual progress report. Next slide, please. Okay. So over the course of these 9 months, we did, of course, continue our engagement with these community steering committees. Previously, during the CERP development period, we were meeting on a monthly basis, but during CERP implementation, these meetings were reduced to quarterly. However, we do feel that these communities are still very engaged in this process and wanted to make sure that we provided information on a timely basis. And so we implemented our AB 617 community newsletters, and those are released generally in between these quarterly update meetings. We also continue to have one-on-one meetings, phone calls, and continue to engage with these 3 committees throughout the implementation period. Next slide. This table just shows a summary of the commitments within the CERP, specifically the actions and goals. You can see that the vast majority of these actions have been initiated or are things that are ongoing that we committed to do within the CERP. A small number have been completed during this time period. I would also mention that the CERP not all the actions and goals were required to be initiated during this time period. Some of them included commitments to initiate that work in future years. Next slide. Okay. I apologize for the really busy slide, but I just wanted to kind of point out a few things, a few highlights from each of the CERPs in terms of the progress. So this is a summary of the CERP actions for the Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach community. You can see they are grouped by the air quality priority as shown on the left. A couple kind of key highlights. We had we had a number of actions that were implemented to address the concerns around refineries. Our FENS system provided notifications to the public with a far more user-friendly interface, which helped improve transparency. We helped incorporate some of the suggestions from the CSE in terms of the type of information that would be useful to provide in such a notification. We also initiated the mobile fence line monitoring, including 17 measurement days during this time period. So we're currently analyzing that data and to help support some of the additional actions that are committed to in the SERP. In addition, we did conduct truck idling sweeps in this community, including 4 enforcement sweeps and more than 200 trucks inspected in this community. And we actually were invited to do a presentation at the Wilmington Neighborhood Council meeting, specifically about our efforts around truck idling. Next slide, please. So this slide is a summary of the SERP actions for the San Bernardino and Muscoy community. Again, summarized by the air quality priority as shown on the left. Again, wanted to just highlight a couple of the key actions that were done during this time period. We had worked with Omnitrans, who has a number of efforts to support their transition to zero emission buses in order to meet the timeline that's required in CARB's regulation. We provided 2 letters of support, and they were successful in getting some grants to purchase these types of buses. We also approved some incentive dollars toward this end. And in addition, the impact of air pollution to schools in this community is something that was a really high priority. And I wanted to highlight that we actually had 3 San Bernardino schools that signed up for our WHAM, or Why Healthy Air Matters program. And we also submitted a letter to CARB for incentive dollars that will go toward the installation of air filtration systems in schools. And that those incentive dollars were approved by CARB. Next slide, please. So this slide is a summary of the SERP actions for the East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, and West Commerce community. You can see the wide variety of air quality priorities that were included in this SERP. In this community, we also conducted truck idling sweeps. You can see this is summarized. We had over 100 trucks inspected across four enforcement sweeps. We also provided incentive dollars that funded about 10 trucks, over $3 million of incentive dollars to help fund that cleaner equipment. Another one of the key, really unique air quality priorities in this community, of course, are the rendering facilities, which was a subject of discussion not only in this community but also in neighboring communities. And we received a lot of feedback from our community steering committee in terms of how they want to get this kind of outreach done and get this information out to the community. We also conducted monitoring around the rendering facilities and presented our monitoring results to the steering committee. Next slide, please. Okay. As far as the emission reduction targets, these were targets that were specified in the SERP. There was a CARB guidance document that specified that 2017 was the year to use for the emissions baseline, and the 2 target years for 2024 and 2029 were also included in the SERP. We had a technical advisory group that consisted of representatives from each of these three communities, and we also worked with CARB to quantify the emission reductions based on the incentives that were allocated during this time, based on any CARB regulations that may have been adopted, and any South Coast AQMD regulations adopted during this time frame. And throughout this period, we will continue to refine the metrics for the emission reductions on an annual basis. Next slide, please. Okay. So this slide represents the emission reductions based on the incentive dollars, specifically the AB 617 incentive dollars that were allocated to each of these 3 communities. So you can see that we allocated more than $80 million in these 3 communities and achieved emission reductions for NOx, PM, and ROG. You can see that there were, there are certainly some differences in terms of the emission reductions achieved, but I would also note that, of course, there are also differences in terms of the total emissions from each of these communities as well. And I would also mention that we are continuing to implement the incentive projects in these communities, as well as, of course, we do expect to implement those incentive projects in the other designated AB 617 communities. But of course, we are also continuing to seek funding to support these projects. Next slide. We received just a couple comments from our community steering committees about our annual progress reports. The first comment we received was about some community-led projects that were related to the actions identified in the SERP. So this has been added to our progress report. And in addition, we received another comment about wanting to see some incorporation of community health benefits associated with the emission reductions achieved by the SERPs. So, I'd mentioned that, this is something that, we are continuing to work with the health departments who have this kind of data to see if there's something that can be done. We understand that there was a community air grant that was awarded by CARB that will help support some efforts related to this. We are also continuing to work on our multiple air toxics exposure study, or MATES-5, which is expected to be released early next year, and that might help to quantify overall community-wide impacts of air toxics emissions, although it won't be specific to the emission reductions from the SERPs themselves. Next slide. So the next steps is we will be providing this report to the full board in October. And then this report does need to go to CARB for review and for the CARB board to consider in December. And of course, implementation on these SERPs will continue for the next several years. And so, stay tuned for future updates and annual reports. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I'll ask a quick question before we get into everybody else, but the MATES-5 study said early next year. Any more detail on when that'll be coming back? Hopefully that means really early next year, or when are you looking at that, and how's that going? Right.
So I'll say this: the monitoring and most of the modeling efforts are near completion. We're just in the data analysis and writing stage at this point. So we're actually hoping to release drafts of the report later this year. Early 2021 was as an estimate in terms of when we might be bringing it to the board as an item.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you for the rest of that presentation. Board members, comments or questions before I ask for public comment on this item? I'm not seeing anyone jumping up and down. All right. Members of the public, do we have any comments or questions on this item number 1, the progress report for AB 617? I see Bill Lamar's hands raised. Bill, you have a minute and a half. And again, we're doing a minute and a half on each item and a total of 3 minutes for all 6 items. So,
right.
I
just have a quick question. I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance. And on Joe K, on your slide 9 for SERP actions for Boyle Heights, under action taken, you show incentives along with enforcement, outreach, and best management practice. Could you give us an example of the incentives that you've given to, I don't know, were they to businesses or to the community, or what is an incentive?
Sorry, I was wondering if, is this the end of your comment? And should I go ahead and address it, or?
Yeah, yes, please. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. You know, incentives can include incentives toward mobile source equipment, such as truck replacements, or also locomotive replacements. We actually, you know, for this community in particular, because one of the priorities was for metal processing facilities, we actually got approval from CARB to use some of the incentive dollars toward some chrome plating projects as well, to help decrease those emissions, those toxic metal emissions from those types of facilities. I would also mention that the AB 617 incentive dollars can also be used toward air filtration projects at schools, and a small portion of the incentive dollars were used toward those projects as well.
Thank you. Well, let's just go ahead and take the next couple comments. If there's any questions, we'll answer them at the end of all the comments. Next speaker, Elba Lillian Petiz. Did I get any of that right, Elba? Go ahead and you should be able to unmute now. Ron, is our speaker unmuted, I take it?
Yeah, Elba is unmuted. She has herself muted.
So Elba, you should be able to see a mute button there towards the bottom of your screen. You should be able to unmute now. All right, let's try Angie. We may go ahead and unmute Angie. Angie, can you try and go ahead and unmute and see if you can?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Very good, go right ahead. You have a minute.
Awesome, my name is Angie Valderas. I'm with the Sierra Club and also one of the hosts for the AB 617. So hi everyone. Joy K, I was just wondering if there's any way you could send me the presentation you just did, or I don't know, we already have it, but I was wondering we could, if I could get a copy of that.
Definitely, we'll get that over to you.
All right, thanks, Joy. That's it. That was all I had.
Great, thank you. We'll try Elba one more time. Elba? All right, Elba, maybe try a different device or try calling in on our phone line. But it looks like you're unable to unmute yourself, but we've unmuted on our side. All right. Any other board member comments on this item?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go right ahead.
So thank you very much for the presentation, staff, and hope everybody is doing okay and breathing okay today. What's happened over the past few weeks really reinforces the importance and the value of our work here at the South Coast AQMD, and trying our best, I guess, to make a difference and improving this situation. It's just interesting how we had some of the best air quality days about 3-4 months ago, and now have gone to the worst air quality days. And boy, I think we all sure can feel the difference here. So thanks for the presentation on 617. Just a couple questions for Joe K. Did look at pages 7 to 9 of the slide, Joe K, on the SERPs and what they contain. So those, some of this stuff still learning about, but all those SERPs were approved by our board, correct?
That's right, they were adopted by our board last September.
And then CARB took a look at them too and has, I guess, adopted them or approved them as well?
That's right, that's right. So CARB has approved all 3.
And just looking at those, there's a lot of rule development in these SERPs for our board, right?
That's right. So the SERPs do include commitments for rule development from our agency, for sure.
So for example, in Wilmington, looking at the SERP, you know, that our board adopted, it references the Port MOU, references Rule 1109.1, Rule 1110, Rule 1148, Rule 1178 as things that are goals for action within that SERP, right?
That's right.
And in San Bernardino, references the warehouse ISR, the rail ISR, and some of the work around the aggregate facilities, which I guess is Rule 1147.1.
That's right. Mhm.
And in East LA, references the rail ISR.
Yes, right. Yes, the rail eyes are for East LA.
So is it staff's view that it's going to be incumbent on our board to take actions and follow through on these commitments in order for us to meet the emissions reductions of the SERPs and to make the 617 process that we're investing so much in all that it can be?
So I'm going to ask if Phil wants to respond to that one.
Actually, maybe I can respond to that. So staff doesn't presume to know what the board will decide, but what we're trying to do is make sure that the board is aware that these are the elements that have been identified within these community emission reduction plans. These are all part of our rulemaking efforts. One of the things that we've been very clear about with the community is that, you know, it's ultimately up to the board to adopt these measures. We can't speak for the board, and we're certainly not going to commit to the board, or commit on behalf of the board, I should say.
Right. But adoption of these rules are key components of what the board has approved in the SERPs, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So we have our work cut out for us, it seems, in the future and next year, and we're spending so much time on these 617 programs. And so eventually, you know, the board, it's easy to write plans and easy to approve them. The real difficult work is actually implementing the plans. And I think that's where 617 and all the work we're putting in is really going to show its promise. So thank you, staff, for all you're doing on this.
Thank you. And if I could just clarify one thing for the San Bernardino Muscogee SERP, the commitments for actions around the aggregate plants or for outreach and enforcement related to those types of facilities rather than rule development. So the outreach was just to make sure that the facility operators understood what it took to comply with the suite of rules that would apply to their facility.
Yeah, I saw that. But Rule 1147.1 is in our rule forecast, right, staff?
That's correct. This is Philip Fine. It is on a rule forecast because of the BARC rules and the landing rules for reclaimed facilities, primarily for NOx, but it was not, that rule wasn't explicitly called out within the SERP in San Bernardino.
But it's for the same kind of facilities, correct?
It has some overlap with those facilities. That's correct.
Thanks, Chair.
No problem. Councilmember Mitchell?
Yes, thank you. I have attended a lot of the AB 617 meetings, and I know Mr. Krakoff has also attended some of them. And one of the issues that came up at the CARB meeting on these three communities last week was how land use is intermingled with cleaning up the air and helping these communities. And so I would like to urge all of our board members to attend some of the AB 617 meetings. You can do it easily since most of them are done by Zoom. We don't have to drive all the way to San Bernardino or to wherever the distant place is from you, because it's pretty informative to hear what the community is thinking about and saying about their communities. And I bring up the land use piece of it because many of us sitting on this board do have local land use control. And while we might not be in control of the particular community that we're looking at, we can help by encouraging our colleagues who sit on local land use authorities within those communities to get involved also. I think that's an important piece of AB 617 that is lacking here. And I brought it up at the CARB meeting rather than work toward a legislative fix on that, if we could encourage our colleagues to participate voluntarily and express to them the importance of this legislation and what we are accomplishing, I think would be a big step forward. And for my colleagues on this board, just to attend to get a taste of what is going on there, to get face-to-face, face-to-face on a Zoom screen, the flavor of the community, what their concerns are, and what is happening in their communities that affect their quality of their lives. So I just wanted to put that out there as encouragement to my colleagues here on this board.
Thank you. It's a great idea. It's definitely something I'll participate some more in. All right, any other comments on this item? All right, with that, we'll go into Joe K. Gosh's second item, our recommendation for the 3-year implementation of the Assembly Bill 617. Go right ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Can we get the slides loaded, please?
Give us just 1 second.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. Well, this item is the recommendation for a year 3 implementation of AB 617, specifically for the recommendation for any additional communities to be recommended for this program. Go ahead, next slide. So AB 617 was into law in 2017. It has a number of requirements.
I'm going to try turning off your video.
Muted.
There you go.
Is this working now? Okay.
Go ahead and give it a
All
try.
right. Okay, we'll go ahead and give this a try. So one of the requirements in AB 617 is the selection of additional communities or locations annually as appropriate. Next slide. Okay. As you heard in the previous presentation, we had 3 communities designated in 2018, or we call these our year 1 communities. Additionally, in 2019, we had 2 additional communities designated. Those are Southeast Los Angeles and our Eastern Coachella Valley communities. And in these 2 communities, we are currently in the SERP and CAMP development stage. Next slide. So each year we go through a process to identify and prioritize any additional communities for the AB 617 program. We put together a very comprehensive analysis and a very extensive public process in the first year of this program. And each year we try to kind of build on that work to make sure that we are capturing the latest available data to help us in these efforts. So the community prioritization process includes using data sources such as our own MATE study, includes using Cal EnviroScreen data that captures community exposure to a variety of environmental pollutants, not just air pollution, as well as community vulnerabilities based on public health data and social and economic conditions. In addition, we also developed our own metric that is a little bit of a land use metric, actually, where we looked at school proximity to freeways as well as industrial land use, since this was noted as a very high priority in many of the communities where we did outreach. Also, very importantly, as you saw from the previous presentation, AB 617 requires a very significant community participation element. And that's something that we really believe helps make this program successful. So when communities demonstrate that they have experience implementing community plans and programs, collaborating across agencies and across across sectors, this is something that helps demonstrate community readiness for a program such as AB 617. And of course, we receive community input through nominations and also through our public meetings. Next slide, please. Okay. So as briefly mentioned in the previous slide, we look at the data that we do have either through these kind of larger programs, but we also use some of our kind of past community-based air monitoring or past community plans as part of the evaluation. We look at the nominations for evidence of community organization and engagement specifically around air pollution issues, because AB 617 specifically directs us to reduce emissions of air pollutants. We look at what resources might be available within the community to help support a program like this. We also want to make sure that we within our region are capturing a diversity of air pollution impacts, including both geographic diversity as well as diversity in terms of the types of air pollution issues that are experienced in the community. And finally, one of the things that's been quite helpful is to look for science-based air pollution projects that the community may have implemented. So this includes engagement around community air sensors, which really shows a high level of engagement around air pollution issues within the community. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the communities that have already been designated, as well as the communities that were under consideration for the future years of this program. Per CARB's guidance, we were asked to split the communities by these tiers, if you will. So you can see the communities that were designated for year 1 in pink, the year 2 communities in green, and then finally there are these kind of 2 tiers, if you will, with the orange and blue for communities being considered for future years. Next slide, please. Okay. So we did receive over 100, about 130 nominations this year. You can see the vast majority were for the South Los Angeles community, a small number for a small number of other communities mentioned. I did want to highlight, some of the things that were mentioned in these nominations and the fact that we received nominations from community residents, local elected officials, and community organizations. That specifically highlighted the burdens on these communities. This included, the range of air pollution sources that are experienced in the community, the fact that there are, toxic air contaminants released by these sources, and also, some specific types of sources that they were concerned about. For example, in South LA, they noted auto body shops, oil and gas extraction facilities, dry cleaners, and also metal plating facilities as examples of the types of sources that the community is concerned about. I would also mention that the nominations for the South Los Angeles community included letters from some organizations such as the Physicians for Social Responsibility LA, SCOPE, Community Health Councils, Esperanza Community Housing, and other organizations, as well as many elected officials representing the local area. Next slide, please. So with that, this year, the staff recommends the addition of 1 community for the AB 617 program, and that's the South Los Angeles community. You can see that we're showing a map on the slide. Your eyes are not tricking you. That is a very fuzzy boundary and intentionally fuzzy. And the idea is that we have a preliminary, we may put together a preliminary boundary, and then we work with the community steering committee to finalize which areas are specifically included in this community. So I would note that the preliminary community boundary includes neighborhoods such as Hyde Park, Jefferson Park, University Park, Exposition Park, historic South Central Vermont, and Florence. This is a community that has a high pollution burden and socioeconomic vulnerabilities, demonstrated by their high scores in both Cal EnviroScreen and MATES. This community also experiences very high public health burdens, including higher mortality rates from coronary heart disease. Oh, sorry, higher mortality from coronary heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and also rates of emergency room visits for asthma. You can see from the map that this community is very close to two major freeways in our area, which is the I-10 and the 110, as well as some industrial corridors and industrial facilities, including petroleum production and Hexchrome facilities. Now, I wanted to also highlight some community efforts that really help demonstrate how this community is ready for the AB 617 program. So the Physicians for Social Responsibility, LA, received 2 AB 617 community air grants from CARB and created the SCLA PUSH program. So this is an innovative project that builds capacity for community-driven efforts. So over a one-year period, 70 South LA residents participated in this training program, which is specifically focused on engaging the community around air quality issues. I'd also note that 51% of the participants were Latina and 49% were Black. So really showing that they were able to engage the communities of color within this community. I'd also say that, mention that this was not just a PSR LA project, but also a collaborative effort with SCOPE, which is Strategic Concepts in Organizing and Policy Education. And this work included collecting and evaluating data from air pollution sensors in the community. So, these organizations and these community residents recognized that they needed and wanted more local air pollution monitoring data in the community. And these proactive efforts help lay a solid foundation for any additional work that can be done through AB 617. In addition to the work organizing residents, I'd also mention that these groups have previously worked with the business community to develop joint solutions. And so this kind of collaborative spirit will be helpful as we work to develop meaningful actions in the SERP. So go ahead and next slide, please. Okay. So the staff recommendation on this item also includes a request to continue working with the legislature to seek some additional funding support, specifically about $4 to $6 million annually for at least 6 years to support the development and implementation of these community plans in the South Los Angeles community. Based on our experience working with these, the previously designated communities, it does take significant staff resources and additional resources such as equipment to implement these community plans. It also mentioned that the state budget for the fiscal year 2021 for AB 617 implementation did remain at the same level as the previous year. Next slide. So the next steps are to bring this item to our board in October for consideration. If approved, then we would seek the funding for year 3 implementation as directed by the board. And in December of this year, CARB will consider communities for this AB 617 designation across the state. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Very good. Board member questions, comments before we go to public comment?
Mr. Chair?
Go right ahead.
Just a couple quick clarifying questions for staff. Does our board weigh in and determining the boundaries of the 617 communities?
So I'd say in the past, the board does approve a preliminary boundary, and then we then go and work with the community to finalize that boundary.
So it's up to the community working through the steering committee to actually finalize it?
That's right.
Thanks. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that. In this community, there have been a lot of issues around oil production, sort of these smaller oil wells next to very sensitive uses. There's been a lot of controversy, sort of on Jefferson Boulevard, Adams, that area. Is that something that our agency has some responsibility for? I understand that there is some sort of memorandum of understanding with CARB or with Dogger, whereby our agency has some inspection responsibilities for those kind of activities. Is that the case?
So certainly, these types of facilities do fall under some of our rules. I don't know if Phil might want to comment regarding an MOU.
Thanks, Joe K. So this could be similar to what was an air quality priority in the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach area, which this rose sort of to the top of the list in terms of concerns. Yes, we do have rules that govern these facilities. They're required to be permitted in many cases. There is CARB rules, mostly focused on methane, that we have worked through CAPCOA and CARB to jointly enforce some of those rules where they sort of overlap with our inspection activities. But the real concern has been for compliance and air monitoring in the vicinity of these facilities to make sure they are in compliance with the rules and regulations. The city of LA has been very active on this. Dogger has a new initiative to be a little more active when it comes to community impacts of these sites. So there's a lot of activity in this area.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mitchell?
I just want to comment that this area is very impacted by oil production, oil wells. And we went through a process with, I believe the company name was Allen Co. It's right next to USC down in that area. And there are a couple other facilities right in that area where oil production is occurring right next to homes. And you've all driven across La Cienega, or maybe you haven't, but in the Baldwin Park area, there is a whole oil field in there right next to the Kennethon recreational facility. And CARB came down a year or so ago and we did a tour of that area. And it came to our attention how much is needed in that community. And I think this is a really good choice for our next community to address. The issues there are a little bit different from what we've seen in the freight corridors, but nonetheless, they're very severe. And there are organizations in that community that are well organized around this issue. And so I think it is a good choice for our next AB 617. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. All right, with that, let's see if our other board members have comments. I'll go ahead and take public comment at this time. All right, our first public commenter, and again, if you're on the phone, you would press *9 to raise your hand, or on your computer at the bottom of the screen, hit the raise hand button. And first up is Storm Hopkins. Storm.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I really appreciate you guys for allowing me to have the time to speak. And I would have a long speech, PowerPoints, but I'll make it short and brief because at this moment, I am like firsthand being in South Central right now. I'm impacted. My breathing is horrible. And I really can't breathe. And I've not like been outside too much. So I apologize. That's why I'm taking heavy intake. So I agree. Like, first and foremost, before I even go so forth as far as who I'm with, I demand a call to action. It's time. I sat with the mayor behind him. That's a friend when he signed the Green New Deal for this transformation. And I also have his pen after it was signed. But okay, I sit as an elected official for the Watts Neighborhood Council. I am a committee member of the Watts Clean Air and Energy, and I also am one of the South LA push ambassadors. I've been on the front line with the air toxicity testing when we did the hitting the street with the machines. And also because of my family being imperative, like my mom has chronic lung bronchitis, my sister, it's imperative in my house. And to know where we sit at in Watts in a 2.1 mile radius, but we have, I think, 5 miles where it catches and collects toxic tests. I have all my community woke now where they actually visit the website, but just to see how polluted and how.
Thank you, Storm, for your comments. They're well received. Our next speaker is Martha Dianguro.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Martadina Arguello. I'm the Executive Director of Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. And I also am the co-chair of Standing Together Against Neighborhood Drilling. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thank you for finally making South LA a priority at the South Coast. We have been working for this for a very long time. We are very ready. And we are, the group of organizations that we work with and are connected to are extremely sophisticated, well organized, and want to make this an opportunity to really innovate and get us to where we need to be in terms of air quality, but also provide key lessons learned for other places that are working on 617. All I can say is we're ready and we've been waiting, and it's time that the residents of South LA got the attention that they need for the range of problems. And I really want to thank Board Member Mitchell for bringing up land use, because one of the things that our coalition and our broad network of folks have been working on land use on general plans and understand that relationship. And want to highlight also that we're working with the City of Los Angeles in the Climate Emergency Department. So we actually have a commission made up of frontline communities that will be instated, that will be there to watchdog, right? One thing is to get good policies. The second is to stay in the game for the years it takes to implement them. And that's what South LA already has. And our air ambassadors have taught us.
Your time
I'm running out of time? Sure,
Yep.
okay.
Yep, great comments, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Is it appropriate if I know Ms. Arguello and her team have been the driving force along with the community group Scope on this. Would I be able to ask her just a quick follow-up question, given the many, many hours they put in on this?
Absolutely, you can ask her a question, sure.
Ms. Arguello, thank you for all that you do in so many ways, and for taking the laboring oar with your organization in this particular effort. I know you've also spent a lot of time on the 617 consultation group and working with CARB and legislators on the 617 process and the implementation of it, to make sure again that it can meet its promise. So my understanding is you're extremely active working with CARB and our staff and many other community folks in that process. As part of that, you understand as well as we all do that the resources are tight, that 617 is on a sort of year-to-year funding. But I also get the sense that, engaging with South Los Angeles and your group in this process and sort of bringing you into the 617 family here at South Coast through inclusion of South LA as a community can maybe help us with these resource issues and some of the prioritization of 617 in the halls of Sacramento and at CARB. Can you speak to that? And, resources, we're just being real. They're a challenge.
Sure.
But can you tell us, how including you actually may help us in that process?
Well, I think because of the level of sophistication around community engagement and outreach and the broad reach of the groups that are part of the South LA push, but all the groups that we're connected to, I think we're very sophisticated. And our conversations right now are an understanding that to make the changes that we need resources, and we understand. And so we are committed to looking at the budget, understanding what it looks like, not just, your budget, but the entire budget, to make sure that there is, reinvestment in South LA in a way that's real and in other environmental justice communities. So we would love to strategize about how to do that, but I will say that our partners are also doing that, looking at existing funding sources, the range of bonds and others that have brought monies for green infrastructure, all of those things. Our coalition is connected to all of that. And so I think that is what makes our group, this particular group, particularly powerful on the issue of fighting for resources. And I think at the last meeting, I did say to Mr. Nastri, if we see benefits, then we will throw down and fight for more resources. And I think that that's the sense of many of our groups, that it has to, we have to see real shifts, not just in how resources are allocated, but in the level of deepening the democracy and the ability to participate by our community organizations and decide. I'm all about, yeah. I want to set the menu as well.
Great. Any other questions, Gideon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again, Martha. All right, I have my next speaker is Physicians for Social Responsibility. If you could go ahead and unmute and just, if you can, say your name for the record, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you and good morning. This is Paula Torrado with Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. Thank you for the time to speak and thank you for the support towards considering nominating South Central Los Angeles. I'm currently implementing our Community Air Protection Grant, our SCLA Push project, through which we have trained over 70 community residents to learn the fundamentals of air pollution and who are ready to engage in air quality policy at the local and state level. And throughout our projects, we have built the technical capacity of our residents, honing on their community wisdom and experience to collectively and understand air pollution data. But this process of community-driven data collection has enabled us to create a narrative that is deeply rooted on what a daylight in South Central Los Angeles looks like and what are the needed solutions to fight air pollution. Our communities have long understood that the problem of poor air quality because they live it every day. And we know that South Central Los Angeles is overexposed to several air pollution sources, ranging from oil drilling, auto body shops, metal facilities, dry cleaners, in addition to high vehicle capacity freeways. And through our push work, and community ground truthing walks, community air monitoring activities, and our research on technology solutions, we show that our communities consistently experience poor air quality and health impacts on a daily basis. And our project has laid the groundwork on community and research to support the development of strong community emission reduction.
Thank you for your comments. Our next commenter, Ruth Andre.
Hola, muy buenos días. Del Distrito de Manejo del Aire del Costa del Sur, mi nombre es Ru Andrade, organizadora de
So if we can go ahead and put 3 minutes on the timer since it's Spanish speaking.
Thank you. Vivo en el sur de Los Ángeles. Estoy aquí hoy por la preocupación de contaminación del aire. Soy parte del proyecto de SCLA Push LA y soy embajadora de la calidad del aire. Estoy aquí porque la comunidad sur Los Ángeles no ha sido seleccionada para un plan AB 617 y nuestra comunidad está lista para comenzar y implementar soluciones para reducir la contaminación del aire. Pedimos que AQMD escuche a nuestras comunidades que han sido descuidadas durante demasiado tiempo. Participé en la Academia de Calidad del Aire de SCLA Push porque me preocupo por mejorar la calidad del aire. Mi comunidad comparte su historia. Más que todo, mi historia es de que vivo de tres pozos de petróleo, que es Alenco, Marfin y lo que es Jefferson en Brooklyn. Esos tres, entonces, nuestra comunidad ha estado puchando todo esto porque la contaminación es demasiado afectada. Hemos sufrido de alergia, dolor de cabeza, han venido abortos, desafortunadamente, y el cáncer, ¿verdad? Que sabemos de que también esto afecta a lo largo. Me gustaría que, por favor, fuéramos ya parte de este programa de protección del aire. Hay que necesita asegurar que pues, nuestras comunidades sean seleccionadas para un plan ABC 617, la mejor del aire. En el sur de Los Ángeles no han sido ignoradas durante mucho tiempo y merecemos esta oportunidad para mejorar la calidad del aire y abordar el legado de contaminación, de perforación petroleras, talleres de carrocería también, tintorería, y debemos empezar una transición justa para una economía limpia en el sur de Los Ángeles. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you for your comments. Gracias.
Do we get a translation there, or how does that work?
What was that, Gideon?
Was that translated, or how does that work?
Yeah, she was speaking in Spanish, and that was our translator that was speaking for her.
Oh, I guess I didn't get the translation. Oh, I
So-
should have pressed interpretation.
Yes,
No, he was.
select English.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little globe.
Right.
Click on that and click on English.
Thank you.
Very good. Our next speaker, Manuel Hernandez.
Aló, buenos días. Mi nombre es Manuel Hernández. Soy miembro de SCOP. Pertenezco a la calidad del aire. Estoy muy preocupado porque no nos han tomado en cuenta el sur centro de Los Ángeles. Nos han dejado fuera. Por favor, yo les pido que aprueben la A617. Soy una persona adulta, tengo nietos y varios de ellos han salido con asma. Soy una persona que acaba de salir de una cirugía de corazón abierto, salgo a hacer ejercicio, nomás salgo a hacer ejercicio y comienzo con irritación de ojos, garganta. La calidad del aire está muy contaminada. Por favor, les pido que aprueben la AB617 para tener una mejor calidad de aire. Gracias, buen día, y tomen en cuenta el sur centro de Los Ángeles para tener una mejor calidad de aire. Gracias.
Gracias, Manuel. Our next speaker, Eric Blyther. Ooh. I see that hand just went away. If you want to speak, go ahead and, oh, Erica, you're down at the bottom. So go ahead and just hit the unmute button. There we go.
Hello, you can hear me?
There you go. Right,
Great.
go ahead.
Wonderful. I'm with the City of Los Angeles Office of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and we are pleased with AQMD's recommendation of South LA, as there are many citizens concerned about emissions from the 3 drill sites, Jefferson, Murphy, and Allen Cove. And we are welcome this advanced air monitoring that you can provide. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for your comments. Ignacio Gutierrez.
Hi, my name is Ignacio Gutierrez, and I'm a member of SCOPE and part of the Push Ambassador project. And I have an air monitor here at my house. And in the morning, since I live right by the 110, I have high readings. And I'm concerned about the pollution here in my community by these industries around my house. And we have a school that's near the 110 freeway, right on 61st and Figueroa. And I'm concerned about those children that have to breathe that air every day right there by the 110 freeway. I hope that you consider South LA. I'm glad that you're considering South LA to be the next candidate for AB 617. And I hope that soon we can breathe better air quality here. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Our next speaker, Marco. Marco, you should be able to unmute now. Go right ahead. Marco, there should be an unmute button now on your device, or star 6, correct?
Oh,
there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, go right ahead.
Good morning, South Coast AQMD. My name is Marco A. Sanchez, and I reside a block and a half north of the Allen Cove oil well site. I'm really happy that you're considering this site to be monitored and studied for future, well, eliminate all this pollution. We had a discharge, so chemical fume discharge last year, October 19th, was very strong. We caused irritation, eye irritation, and breathing problems. And when we called the AQMD, because they're currently monitoring, they said unfortunately that day the monitor was not on. I feel that this monitor should be on 24/7 because it causes a lot of health issues. And another thing is that the city attorney has filed 20 plus criminal indictment against this company, as well as the state has issued orders to shut down. I think you guys need to be there 100%, 24/7 in monitoring the situation. And in addition to myself, like I said, I live a block and a half away from there. Next door to them is the St. Mary's College, and south of them, it's the high school for disabled children. I mean, it's ridiculous that all these years have gone by, nothing has been done to shut this off.
So Vice Chair, I think he was referring to Alan Co. And I'm going to ask Jason Lowe just to provide some information with regards to the monitoring that we have. We actually have the remote capability to trigger that, but Jason, if you could speak to that.
Sure. Thank you, Wayne, and good morning, members of the committee. I'm Jason Lowe, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer, Science Technology Advancement over the Monitoring Analysis Division. So we have been having monitoring there for multiple years, especially since that particular facility was made aware to have issues. And when we look at the recent monitoring data, we were basically, as the gentleman had mentioned, we had switched to a schedule where we take a sample 1 every 6 days. We were measuring for essentially air toxics to see if there's any long-term impact to the community. And then, as he mentioned, we do have this response capability where if there are odors detected and there's a potential release that would be of concern, then the 1-800-CUT-SMOG would be used, where our inspectors would go out and investigate the situation and potentially take an air sample. So when we looked at the data, we do have noted in the past few years that the air for the air toxics has been within typical levels when we compare it against our MATE studies or against our nearest air monitoring station, which does measure for the air toxics. So what we've done is, because we understand the frustration that the sample was not collected on a day where they would really want extra information. So when we investigated that schedule, where it's very just rigid on that 1 every 6 days, we adopted a different strategy, which is to have a remotely activated sampler. So in case there's an incident that we become aware of, that sampler can go ahead and activate, collect a sample even before an inspector can get there. So we have this information that we can have to evaluate, and that would assist the investigation when the inspector gets there, and they can have that as an extra body of chemical information for their investigation. So that's our strategy moving forward. We've been working with the community to see if we can let them have some air canisters as well, to be part of this solution. And we're working to get some paperwork established and scheduling the next steps meeting with the community.
Thank you, Jason. Turn it back to you, Chairman.
Thank you. All right, our next speaker, Gloria Medina. Gloria?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
So Gloria Medina, Executive Director at Scope, Scoping, a member of South Central LA Push. And I am here in support of the recommendation to designate South Central LA. At Scope, we have almost 30 years of engaging communities members in addressing the issues that most impact them. And I just want to say that air pollution is one of those that always rises up to the top. That is very important for our community members. Our community members have been really carrying the brunt of the burden, and they have really been paying the price with their health of inaction. So we want to make sure that we're here today so that we're making sure that we're going down the right path from here on. As many have said, South LA is not only surrounded by major freeways, but South LA residents are also exposed to toxic air due to stationary sources that are located right in our community, in our backyards, next to our schools, across the street from our parks. Residents are demanding long overdue solutions that reduce emission in their communities. And I just want to say, I have been so impressed by our community members and our community residents and scope members who have engaged in the Air Quality Academy, where they have really committed to training and leadership development so they can be ready to guide and push forward a plan for solutions. So our folks are ready. They have learned the science and taken into their own hands the data collection, including.
Thank you for your comments, Gloria. I'm glad to hear that they're taking that time to do that. Thank you. Our next speaker, Aretha.
How you doing? My name is Aretha. I am a member of SCOPE as well as an ambassador for air quality for PUSH. And I'm speaking on behalf of South LA. As a person that suffers with asthma and diabetes, I am highly concerned of the air quality that we experience. We are experiencing environmental racism. South LA has been put to the side many, many times. We've never been considered. And I think it's time that we get that push we need to get clean air. We deserve healthy, prosperous community, which is something we don't have right now. I live near body shops. I can walk out my house and walk near all these things, oil drilling. I see it every day. I feel it in my health. And I'm just ready to breathe clean air and to get it done. We are committed to making sure that it is implemented correctly. We're training for it. We're working towards it. And please consider South LA for the AB 617. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Laura Madura. Laura?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Laura Muraida and I'm the Research and Communications Director at SCOPE. I'm also speaking in support of this recommendation. And in addition to what others have said, I'd like to just add that SCOPE has successfully worked with labor, workforce development, and key agency partners, including the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and the City and County of LA, to enact sectoral interventions that result in improved economic, health, and environmental outcomes for our community. We're working also in partnership with the California Environmental Justice Alliance and researchers around just transition strategies and are excited to work on exploring air quality issues in South LA and identifying strategies for just transition in local sectors that are impacting our community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker is Gina.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Great. So thanks for making the time today. My name is Gina Trusambat. I'm the Policy and Research Associate with SCOPE. And just wanted to mention that in addition to our work in PUSH, that our community members are also currently engaged in the Transformative Climate Communities Planning Grant to identify goals and solutions for a just transition in the Slauson Corridor, which includes planning for the future of land use and green jobs, in addition to other strategies. So just to reiterate that our residents are looking at sustainable solutions and that South Central is organized and knowledgeable and is ready to continue our work through AB 617. And to thank you again for your consideration in selecting South Central today. So thank you.
Thank you, Gina. And our last speaker, Oscar M.
Can you hear me?
Oscar, go ahead and try again. You're breaking up a little bit.
Can you guys hear me now?
You're in and out. Your internet might be a little weak, but go ahead and give it a try.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so good morning, South Coast Air Quality Management. My name is Oscar Morales. I live in South Central, and I am here today because I'm concerned about the air pollution, and I am a part of South Central Los Angeles PUSH Ambassador of Air Quality. I am here because the South Central community of LA has not been selected for an AB 617. And our community is ready to start implementing solutions to reduce the air pollution.
An example of is that I have allergies, and every time I go outside, I start sneezing a lot, and there's times that I even start bleeding. There was one time that I kept bleeding and wouldn't stop, and that day I didn't went to school for that reason. So this is why I'm saying to clean the air, because right now that we're staying inside, I haven't bleed at all because I haven't gone outside to breathe the air that is polluted. And our community are concerned that South Central Los Angeles is being left out of the air protection program and needs to be ensured our communities are selected for AB 617 air improvement plan. Thank you, and that's all.
Great, thank you. All right, that's our.
Chairman Benoit, we do have one call in on the Spanish line.
Okay.
Anthony, can you release that call?
Okay, the call is released.
The caller on the Spanish line, if you want to go ahead. Ron, are they unmuted now, or?
No, they're not. They're not unmuting. We already asked them to unmute.
So the caller on the Spanish line, can you go ahead?
So we've asked them to unmute and they're not unmuting. Anthony, can you just remind them to hit *6?
Okay.
Do we need to ask them in Spanish?
I hear
Hola.
the interpreter. Okay, there you go. She's on.
Oh, buenos días. Sí, buenos días. Mi nombre es Guadalupe. Yo vivo en la ciudad de Los Ángeles, ¿verdad? Y estoy aquí porque me preocupa la contaminación del aire. Soy parte del proyecto CLA PUSH y soy embajadora de la calidad del aire. Estoy aquí porque me preocupa mi comunidad. Donde yo vivo hay mucha contaminación. Tenemos pozos de petróleo en la Jefferson y Woodlawn, otro en la Adams y Gramercy, otro en la 23 y Estrella. En mi caso personal tengo mi hija con sinusitis y asma y es muy preocupante eso de estar en urgencias dándole oxígeno para respirar. Necesitamos hacer algo para disminuir la contaminación y necesitamos que seamos escuchados en el sur centro de Los Ángeles. Hay vecinos que sus hijos también tienen asma y los pozos de petróleo están cerca de escuelas. Vivo cerca de un freeway donde transitan muchos camiones de carga y el humo fétido, ¿verdad? Contamina también el aire y por eso es que vivimos una pobre calidad de vida. El sur de Los Ángeles ha sido ignorado por mucho tiempo y merece estar esta oportunidad para mejorar la calidad del aire y abordar el legado de contaminación de performación petrolera, talleres de carrocería, tintorerías, y debemos empezar una transacción para una economía limpia y un sur centro de Los Ángeles mucho más saludable. Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you for your comments. All right, I have one last speaker that popped up, Zeph. Zeph, you should be able to unmute now.
¿Me puede escuchar? Ok, gracias.
Go ahead.
Gracias. Mire, yo primeramente quiero darle las gracias. Ahorita. Quiero darle las gracias por su buen trabajo que están haciendo. Creemos que esto no es de hoy. Esto ha estado hace muchos años. Pero creo yo que debemos educar primeramente nosotros como industria a nuestros trabajadores para que no dejen emitir los los humos, ¿verdad? De los platings y pongan buen equipo. Pero lo más importante, creo yo, que se comienza en casa, ¿verdad? Nosotros están hablando mucho de Campton. Bueno, podemos hablar de cualquier ciudad, pero creo que nosotros, como miembros de una comunidad, tenemos que unirnos primero como familias para educarnos y así poder hacer nuestra parte y no echarle la culpa a una institución nada más, porque se comienza en casa el buen vivir y en este caso nos interesa a todos. ¿Escucharon?
Sí.
Ok. Si quiere usted pueden hablar inglés. Yo me facilito más en español, por eso quise traer esto. ¿Alguien quiere decir algo? Porque tengo una pregunta muy importante. Ok, mi pregunta es esta. ¿Qué hay de AQMD, los recursos de AQMD, para ir y hacer, no digo una campaña, pero dar información, ¿verdad? Como lo están haciendo en el censo ahorita, ¿verdad? Para poder educar a cada familia acerca del medio ambiente. No escucho a nadie.
So this is a time for you to speak, and we can comment after, but this is your time.
Ok. No. Muchísimas gracias a cada uno de ustedes. Muchas gracias, muy agradecido, verdaderamente. Sigan haciendo su buen trabajo y yo sé que cada uno de ustedes da lo máximo. Síganlo haciendo, porque de poco.
Gracias. And as for your question, if you could translate this, please. The education will probably come later. This is first to come into the area and to identify and help find what are the issues, what are the problems, and help address those, and then also to go and get more funding from the state so that we can come back and do the hard work and the hard education that we need to do after that. This is the first step, hopefully the first step of many. All right, one last speaker, and this will be our last speaker for the afternoon. So we can go ahead and get to the panel. Unless, I don't think this person spoke yet. Maybe, did this person already speak, Eva?
I think she tried to before, but didn't.
¿Aló?
Hello.
¿Aló?
Hello. Did you speak before or no?
Sí. No he hablado, mi amor. Hasta ahorita
Okay,
que lo.
go right ahead.
Ajá. Buenos días, Distrito de Manejo del Aire de la Costa del Sur. Yo soy Elba Lilian Pleites, miembro de SCOP. Me preocupa la contaminación del aire. Soy parte del proyecto de SLA, PUSH, y embajadora de la calidad del aire. Pedimos que se escuche que la comunidad ha sido descuidada por mucho tiempo. Estoy preocupada, soy del sur central de Los Ángeles, he quedando del programa de protección del aire, que la comunidad seleccionada en un plan de AB 617 de mejora del aire ha sido ignorada, de la perforación de pozos, carrocerías, tintorerías. Tenemos que empezar la transacción justa para una buena economía y el sur de Los Ángeles que sea saludable. Yo sé que sí se puede y estamos preparados para la lucha. Muchas gracias, pasen buen día.
Oh, sorry, my mute on there. Gracias to the last speaker. We'll come back to the panel. Councilmember Mitchell, go right ahead.
Yes, I just want to say that having heard from this community, we can see that they are well organized, and we can also understand why this community should be our next AB 617 community. I've been aware of the oil drilling problems in this community for a few years, and we haven't really focused on that as much as we should be focusing on it. And I do want to correct my misstatement earlier. I think I called this Baldwin Park. I meant Baldwin Hills in the Inglewood oil field area. I sometimes get those mixed up, but they're very different communities. So I wanted to make that correction. But I understand this would come to the board in October for approval. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I would, I certainly think this is a community deserving of protections under AB 617. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other colleagues have comments? All right, well, thank you very much, staff, great job. And I look forward to seeing this come to the full board. And I know we will be in a, I don't want to say a fight, but I think we will join the fight to find more funding for these communities and our other 617 communities. But this one obviously needs to come to the top of the list, and we need to move forward, and we just need to make sure we find those funds. So I'm encouraged by the group today, the speakers, and joining them and finding those monies and making sure we can do that. And I know that'll be part of our priorities to come to the full board with this next community.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, with that, we'll move on to item number 3, the summary of proposed attendee, to amend Rule 1178. Michael Morris.
Good morning, Chair Benoit and committee members. Brief presentation on Rule 1178. This is a rule that regulates VOC emissions from storage tanks at petroleum facilities. Next slide, please. So there was some earlier discussion with Joe Kay about the community emission reduction plan for Wilmington. It does include 1178, but I should put a disclaimer out there that this amendment is not part of that effort. This is addressing a safety issue that was identified recently. Next slide, please. So the safety issue that was identified relates to wastewater storage tanks. Back in 2008, facilities had the option of either putting a domed tank on or accepting a permit condition. In 2019, that option went away in 2008, and now that facilities that go over the 3 PSI limit in the rule their only option is to put on a domed tank. The safety issue that came up is that if a wastewater storage tank does put on a dome, and that wastewater storage tank contains hydrogen sulfide, which many of them do, there is a condition that will be created where iron sulfide can form on the dome tank. And the iron sulfide is pyrophytic material, which means that it can spontaneously ignite in air. And so this is a situation that we don't want to occur, that could create many additional problems. So we're here to propose an amendment to address that particular issue. Next slide, please. So what we would allow with this amendment is that facilities that do find that a wastewater tank does exceed 3 PSI, that we would allow them to accept the permit condition to limit that in lieu of putting on the dome tank. Next slide, please. This amendment will forego about 2.4 pounds per day of VOC, which is a very tiny amount. And with this amendment, we don't expect there to be any costs. Next slide, please. We are planning to bring this to the board in November. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Board member comments or questions?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
I would say that this is pretty important. I live in an area that is surrounded by a lot of these tank farms where you don't know exactly what's in them, but I think that this certainly, you do this balancing. Do we want to allow a few VOC emissions or do we want to have fires in these tanks? And I think the answer on that is pretty clear. So I think I'm just going to put that out there right up front. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board member comments or questions or members of the public for this item? All right. Pretty straightforward on that one. We'll bring that back to the board. All right, our next item is a status update on the development of proposed rule 1109.1. Michael, go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman Benoit and the members of the committee. Paul, if you could bring up the presentation, that would be great. My name is Mike Kraus, Planning and Rules Manager, and I'm here to present to you an update on our proposed Rule 1109.1, seeking nitrogen oxide emissions reductions from refinery equipment. Next slide, please. Okay, so this particular proposed rule will apply to 16 refineries and refinery-related facilities. We want to establish a best available retrofit control technology limit for those combustion pieces of equipment. We're talking about 300 pieces of equipment. This has all been born out of the control measure CMB05, if you recall, from the 2016 AQMD that sought to transition the reclaimed facilities into a command and control approach. It also supports Assembly Bill 617 that was adopted by the state back in 2017 that required us to implement BART on an expedited schedule, but had another few elements that I'll touch base with in a second. We're seeking to take this to the board for consideration of approval and a public hearing on the first quarter 2021. This is a first of briefings, by the way, to the Stationary Source Committee. Because this is a massive project, we thought it was really important to introduce this to you. So and we'll follow up with you as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, these are the affected facilities. You recognize these petroleum refineries on the first column there. But this rule also affects some smaller refineries as well. Ones that produce asphalt, ones that are biofuels. So therefore they take oils and fats and greases and produces things like diesel fuel and jet fuels, things like that. There's also some related operations that support the refinery, such as hydrogen plants and sulfuric acid plants. Next slide, please. We've been working on this rule since early 2018, but it's been very extensive. We've had a number of 14 working groups. Our working group is very large. It's over 100 folks. These involve the affected industry stakeholders, environmental groups, there's community groups. There's also fellow government agencies as well. We have visited about 14 facilities. These are really important for us to get out there to those site visits, particularly this rule. As you know, refineries are very complex facilities, and they have a lot of challenges out there as well as we kind of merge into some of these more controlled technologies. We've even traveled outside of our jurisdiction to a refinery up in Bakersfield, Oil City, Oildale up there to learn about new technologies that are being used elsewhere. Well, we've also met, speaking of technologies, we've also met with vendors. These vendors are folks that create not just combustion control equipment, such as burners, but also post-combustion, meaning on the outlet, you then install control piece of equipment, such as a selective catalytic reduction, or SCR. It's one of the most effective technologies out there, and it's been well established and commercially available and achieved in practice and what have you. So it's really important for us to meet with the vendors to kind of understand what the limitations are and their challenges in meeting the limits that we want to seek. And then finally, we've also met with the community as well, in mentioning that Joe Kay talked about the affected communities by refineries. There was an interest in the SERP for the Carson-Wilmington area. And so we actually specifically had a meeting for them so we can really hear their concerns. And we'll touch base on that in a second. Next slide, please. Okay, when it comes to this BART analysis, this is really what we're getting at. So we sent out surveys, analyzed thousands of pieces of data, all to satisfy the analysis that's being required. So what is that analysis? So just remind everybody that best available retrofit control technology is trying to seek the maximum degree or maximum amount of emission reductions that also accounts for other elements as well, such as environment, energy, and economics. This is an evolving standard. As you can imagine, technology improves over time. And so what is barked today might not have been barked 10 years ago, and vice versa, it could be 10 years in the future. So, so we also look at that as far as like, what is the technology today, or what's evolving now that could be really successful in the future. And again, it's not just always about the technology. The element of cost effectiveness is a requirement, and that is also plays a role in making this determination. And then finally, in the 2016 AQMP, we had a more like a guidance threshold that staff uses in order to help navigate us in making the BART determination. Slide 6, please. Okay, in that development, I just wanted to highlight a couple things. So, because I think a lot of times people, when they think about BART limits, it's always just apply the technology, get your lowest limit. But again, there's other elements at play. And so while we work on starting out, seeking that maximum amount and applying that appropriate technology, and sometimes there's going to be multiple levels of doing that. We call that an iterative approach. So we sort of seek for the most stringent first, go through that cost analysis. If not, then we look at other alternatives as we kind of work our way through the process. Again, if it's not cost effective, we either move on to the next form of technologies out there, or we could apply certain things such as when the equipment in the future gets replaced, then apply the new technology. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to show a big overview. Then we have actually gone through the analysis already on all the class and categories for refinery equipment. So what you'll see here, I know it's a lot of information to digest, but basically on the left here, these are the equipment categories. Some of the categories actually had to be sort of bored down a little bit further because such as like sizes of the equipment can impact the results. So in the case of, let's say for the heaters, when you're dealing with a smaller size heater, they have different performances that they're able to do. And when you do a BART analysis, again, you're applying not just the technology, but also the cost effectiveness. The result comes up to what we call a $1 per ton result. That may not pan out for smaller pieces, but may be very cost effective for larger pieces. So again, we've kind of broke these out, not only the category, but also quote unquote class of them. And so the couple of things I wanted to highlight here is, again, you can see of the different sizes, how it gets impacted. But in the case of some of the larger ones, like in the case of the heaters or boilers greater than 40 million BTU per hour, we're able to achieve a very low concentration of NOx. So that's a really great accomplishment. But it's also going to mean, though, to more work that needs to be done. Obviously, the controls equipment, maybe some new burners, et cetera. But we also have to think about things like, you'll see a column here called averaging time. That just is the allowance of time we're providing for the facilities to meet that limit. Because we're talking about really low limits, we think it's really important to provide the appropriate time that's needed in order to meet those really low limits. Next slide, please. So we continue on with more of these categories as well. A couple highlights here just for your edification. In some of the equipment, such as like a co-calciner or an FCCU, the fluid catalytic cracking units, those are processes. So they're not necessarily just one piece. It's a piece, but it's affected by a whole string of a process that kind of goes on. So, but ultimately we still have an outlet, concentration that we're seeking for them. As you can see, for both those pieces of equipment, we're able to make a BART determination at a very low level. However, it's again really important to provide the appropriate time or averaging time in order for them to make that work. But we wanted to put bumper guards in there. So when you see something like under the co-calciner, you see 2 concentrations and 2 different averaging times. It kind of allows them that, we want to achieve those lower limits. We want to provide the appropriate times that they can balance that out and make that work. But we, again, on a limited time, like for 7 days, to provide an additional level there that they can then continue to ultimately achieve in a year basis. Next slide, please. And so the important thing now is to consider, after you have all of this now packaged up, to look at what kind of timing we would allow for them to implement this completely. So we sort of set out some criteria. So first things, we want to ensure that the BART limit is being achieved. We also are recognizing that in AB 617, it talks about the higher priorities for those pieces that haven't been modified for the longest period of time. But we also recognize that overall, with those numbers that I just showed you, we're going to be achieving some substantial reduction, 7 to 9 tons. So when we think about an implementation, we think about it in terms also of feasibility and we recognize what they need, the times that's needed. Because if you don't, and you kind of make that implementation too rigid, then you could lose on some of the great achievements you could get if you had them putting in additional controls. And so for us, especially when it comes to refineries, they have unique conditions that we want to consider. So if you go to the next slide, I've kind of sort of outlined some of those. First off, big picture here, 220 pieces of equipment out there at the refineries that are not currently meeting the limits that we're proposing. These are complex projects that are going to require engineering and design and logistics and installation time, as well as testing, or we call it commissioning. This involves over 100 of these SCR projects. SCR is in just one piece of that post-combustion, right? You require ammonia to be injected, so you got to have an ammonia tank. You need to have the pumps and things like that to transport that. When we also talk about burner technology, again, we're just not talking about a technology or combustion controls that are just 1 or 2 or 10. Some of these heaters actually have hundreds of burners. So again, all these factors need to be considered. These projects aren't cheap either. They can be $10 million per project, and some refineries have multiple projects, or all of them, I believe, do have multiple projects. So we do want to account the fact that they do have turnaround times, that there are specialized skilled labor force out there, and so there's going to be a level of construction demand that we have to recognize. Next slide, please. And so as we continue this process, we have been talking, I said, about the stakeholders. Just wanted to highlight that they have weighed in that they felt that the 8-hour averaging time was too long. We also recognize that when they come in for a permit for SCRs, that there's new source review and there's potential backed PM backed that they may be challenged with. So we're addressing some of these issues. And then finally, we've also, if you recall, hired some consultants for these to assist us in doing that analysis. So in looking at things like, are bar limits reasonable, the averaging times, space constraints, cost, what have you. And we're expecting to have those results by the end of the year. And the last slide, Paul, please. And so for our next steps, we're going to continue our meetings. We're working right now on some draft rule language to get out to the stakeholders. Again, we'll be releasing some of those reports. Hopefully we'll get a chance to have them actually present to our stakeholders as well. And then the wrapping up process of the workshops and everything, and taking again to the board in the beginning of next year. And that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Great presentation. I don't see any hands raised on the attendee side. Judith, I see your hand raised. Go right ahead.
Yes.
Please.
Did you ask me? Can I talk?
Right ahead.
Okay. I do have some questions on slide 7, for example.
Paul, if we could go to slide 7, so everyone can reference.
So I'm just looking at, say, the current NOx level, say for heaters, it's 30 to 60, and the proposed BART limit that you put next to it is 40/9.
Sure.
So I think down in your footnotes, you say that where there are 2 numbers here, the second limit is a future effective limit. Is that what I should think about those numbers that I just mentioned?
Sure, no problem. For some clarification, so when we talk about the current NOx levels, again, we're going back to the activity from a number of facilities. So some facilities actually might be under like a consent decree or something that might be regulating them at around the 30. But again, as we kind of go through the cost analysis, it wasn't cost effective to go down that low, but the 40 sort of was cost effective. So that's why we're proposing a 40 at this point in time. However, we are also proposing a future emerging technology. There has been some emerging technology out there. We've met with some vendors. Vendors actually presented to the working group that can get down to at least 9, if not sometimes even lower. But we were proposing a 9 for that future. We're still considering how that would play out. Most of the time for emerging technologies, it would be like a future set fixed year. So like if you're you know, by a certain fixed date, then they need to be performing at a level of 9. Or it could be when replacing for, you know, end of useful life sort of thing. Yeah. With regards to the footnotes, I believe you're referring then to the cost column. Is that correct? Or just the 40 and 9?
I was just looking at the bark to limit, but
Yeah.
is the 40 then that you're proposing, is that across the board for all refineries? And you calculated in cost effectiveness, and that is cost effective because these refineries are pretty different. You know, sometimes it's more expensive at one refinery than another to put in that piece of equipment or change that piece of equipment. So that's
Sorry, just to be clear, we did the BART analysis for class and category. So it would be for the heaters at less than 20 million BTU per hour. So all of those. So different refineries would have those sizes. Not all refineries might have that size, but it's of the class and category. So yes, those limits affect all the facilities across the board for that class category.
I just wanted to jump in. What we did for this rule and for many of the rules that we're bringing forward to the board is we did what we were referring to as a bottom-up approach. So meaning that we're looking at each piece of equipment and calculating the cost effectiveness associated with each piece of equipment and then averaging that cost effectiveness for the class and category. So where there is variation for one piece of equipment at a certain facility because they highlight something that might be unique at their facility, we build that into the cost.
And then AB 617 requires to be at barked by 2023. Is it require it to be at barked or just to start transforming equipment to barked in 2023? Tell me how that plays into our rule.
Mayor Mitchell, maybe I can address that. This is Philip Fine. This has been a question that has come up across the districts throughout the state who are implementing AB 617. Our approach is we know that, you know, given the refinery turnaround schedules, given the limited, what Mike mentioned, that just there can't be so many construction projects happening simultaneously. There just aren't enough construction or engineering resources to do that all at the same time, that it's actually not feasible to get all of this done by the end of 2023. And barked includes an assessment of feasibility. So you could think of it as whatever is feasible by 2023 is barked for 2023, and we will implement by 2023. But if it can't be implemented by 2023, then it sort of can't be barked given that timeline. So that's the way we're looking at it. And Mike mentioned that we're working on an implementation schedule that highlights that prioritizes the highest emitting equipment, the oldest equipment, and getting the most emission reductions as soon as possible. Other districts have interpreted implementation of barked of having the rules in place and having every facility on a schedule. We're going beyond that. We're trying to get as many emission reductions as possible by the end of 2023.
Okay, thank you. That answers my questions.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Very good. Gideon, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Michael Kraus.
Sir?
Want to commend you for making this topic somehow sound interesting and exciting during your presentation today.
You're right. I love my job.
I can tell. What, again, what's the rule forecast timeline for bringing this to the board?
March of 2021.
Can't wait. CEQA, is there a CEQA process that's required for this?
Absolutely. Yes, we're doing our CEQA team is actually working on the document right now.
And so what is it? It's going to be a notice of preparation and then an EIR or something different?
It'll be like
that if you decide.
No worries. Our agency is under what's called a certified regulatory program. So under the CEQA guidelines, we do basically an EIR equivalent. We call it an environmental assessment. But yes, it'll be a full-blown EIR equivalent document. So we're actually, this was before you joined the board. We have done a program EIR already for the AQMD. As part of that process, we actually looked at when reclaim moves into the command and controls, but on a programmatic level. So, we're going to be tearing off of some of that information, but mainly the bulk of the analysis will be about the new impacts from the SCR installations, burner installations, things like that, and construction operation are, I would say our usual process.
That's all I had. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kraus.
Very good. We do have one public comment that came up during the conversation. I'll go ahead and take it now. Elba?
Great.
Go ahead, Elba Lillian Petis.
No, yo ya hablé, gracias. Lo que pasa es que no sé cómo bajar la manita, no me le ponga atención. Gracias.
Oh, very good. Thank you. All right. Unless there's any other comments on that item, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. We only have about 10 minutes to wrap up, so we might move through these a little faster. Unless someone has a particular question on them, do we need the actual report on this one, Tracy, or this is a standard report, correct?
This is a report we bring to the governing board every year. We can waive the presentation, Mr. Chair.
Okay, unless anyone has a question on that. Not seeing any hands raised on either side. All right, we'll go ahead and waive the presentation on the AB 2588 program. Thank you. The other report is the reclaim report. Susan Nakamura, again, this is a bit of a standard report at this point. Susan, unless there's anything you need to highlight, go ahead and waive the report.
Sure.
Okay, unless board members have any questions or comments on those. Any members of the public on that item? I'm not seeing any hands raised again. All right, with that, we have our written reports that are attached. Any questions or comments on those? All right, any other business by the rest of the board? All right, that brings us to our general public comment period. This is for items that are not on the agenda. If anyone has a comment they'd like to make at this time for items not on the agenda, if they could raise their hand now. I'm not seeing anyone on the either side raising their hand. All right, well, thank you all for attending today. Thank you for getting that through that staff who did a great job today and all the presentations and reports. Our next meeting will be Friday, October 16th at 2020, back here at 10:30, unless we need to push again to get an extra half hour in. But thank you, staff, for doing that. And again, thank you, staff, for the hard work on the translations today. I think that was it worked out very well, and just a great job all the way around. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah.